channel. My name is Matt, and this is my channel, Evolve with Monette. For those of you that are new here, I am a professional intuitive empath. So happy to share some energy with you today. And we are going to get right into the message today. So, this message is one that I think a lot of us can use and need from time to time because life does throw us curveballs. And after this pandemic, after this year, after the many losses that so many of us have endured personally by watching the world, it's like we were at the campfire on the internet, we were all telling our stories of woe and loss. And so if there is no time that I think that there is a better time than to talk about this. I have several videos up here about grief coming in waves and how I've mourned people that I've really lost or figuratively lost or spiritually lost when disconnections happen or relationships break. We go through a period of mourning, and I certainly had. I have a friend in my life who gifted me with this book, Tear Soup, that I'm going to read for us today. So get your cozy socks on and get into a comfy place. Do you have a book nook in your house, or a favorite chaise maybe, or a window seat, or just your bed? And I want you to put up your feet and recline and let some of the information permeate through that magical head. I want us to connect today because if you clicked on this video, understanding how to completely see the title, then you know that it's about grief and about healing and about rising up after defeat. And it is so brilliantly covered in this book. The Ethel to my Lucy gave me this book because there was a thing in my life, a tower moment that did shake everything. And I was going through a period of grief. It was a loss. It was a loss like a divorce. It was a loss like the loss of a loved one. It was the loss of the end of a friendship. It was so many things, right? I struggled. And my friend, who is an empath and who is a Pisces empath, so she's super, super intuitive, struggled with me struggling. And she loved me and wanted to hold space for me. But at times my pain was too heavy for her. And the thing that I love about her is she just told me. There were no misgivings, there were no mind games. When it was too much, she communicated it with me, and I respect her so much for it, because what it got, for what we were able to do, was we both learned beautiful lessons that will stand the test of time, and that validated and solidified our friendship as true. Because it's when you go through hard times of any kind, even if it's not just about you and them, but maybe you and you, okay, you will see and test the metal of a relationship, and all relationships have opportunities to be tested. So that was a test for us, because I want you to understand, in one part I felt, do you not support me? How can you not understand? You're so metaphysical, you get it. And then in another part, she was a friend who was having to deal with my waves of grief. Even though I wasn't speaking to her on a daily basis, because we were so connected, she felt them. That happens when you're connected with people. Empaths, we speak in 5D. So she was feeling it and transmuting it, maybe coming across some of these videos. So even if I thought I was keeping it to myself, she was still feeling it, right? So I had to have some compassion there in that regard for her. And then I had her have compassion for me. And I was like, I don't know how long. I don't know when it's going to stop. I don't know, because grief is something that fills up even the biggest of pots. And the irony is after we worked through a lot of our friendship stuff over the last year regarding her managing of my grief, what that meant, me pushing back to stick up for myself, but also her saying, not that I acquiesce, but like, I get it, I understand, or maybe, but do you understand my point? We had this really beautiful moment. She gave me this book recently called Tear Soup. I don't even know if she's read it, but when I read through it, when she gave it to me, I thought, wow, what a beautiful bow on our, like, sometimes things happen in your life and you don't know why it's happening. A relationship snafu pops up, or a workplace snafu, or a car. It's all to get your attention. There is always a lesson. I had that experience with her where we both had feelings that were not always in line, and maybe even a little bit hurt on either side, but we worked through it, which is what you can do with what Brene Brown calls a rock friend, right? You can work through something again and again. And not again and again bad behavior and abuse. This woman's not an abusive person. She has her own views, right? Don't we all have our own views? So what that meant is that we can work through something again, because that's a friendship that is not heading towards an end. When you have lines of communication that stay open, then you're able to actually connect, and you can mend anything that happens. So this wasn't even a tear for us, ironically, but it was this beautiful place where I found another lesson and God's good grace. And I was grateful because this person stood with me in her own way by saying I might need some space, or today I'm available to hold space. I respect her for it. And it concluded with this beautiful thing. I'm going to point out when she pops up here in the book because I saw her energy and I was very proud of it. It is so richly done, this book. Let me go ahead and get back into teacher monad, okay? Tear Soup by Pat Schweibert and Chuck Declan, illustrated by Taylor Bills. And let me tell you, Taylor has done a brilliant job. Just on the front cover, we have this aesthetic, very 90s, that I love, and it says a recipe for healing after loss, which is what I've titled the video, as well as moving into the book that says memories that the dog is laying on top of. Because our grief, after all, is about many things, including memories. There's beautiful illustrations. It's so rich. I would highly recommend this book if you have someone who is going through grief, or a child that's going through grief, or an adult, because today we're going to do some adulting and we're going to talk about this. But a recipe for Brandy's recipe for tear soup. I won't read it through because I think it would be a spoiler. So we'll get into it. It's pretty involved, guys. This is going to be about a 45-minute period of time that we spend together. So you can pause this and come back if you do not have the time. We're taking it in increments as you wish. And so we begin. Let me see if my backwards reading skills are still on point. I don't know, guys. I may have to read and then show you the picture. There was once an old and somewhat wise woman whom everyone called Brandy. She just suffered a big loss in her life. Pops, her husband, suffered the same loss, but in his own way. This is a story of how Brandy faced her loss by setting out to make tear soup. Maybe you guys can see Brandy. Her little faithful pups. Some of us have faithful pups around. And there's Pops in the background. They're both dealing differently. For many years, the custom of making tear soup had been forgotten. As people's lives became more rushed, they found it much easier to pull soup in a can from the shelf and heat it on the stovetop. But several years ago, Brandy got a taste of a well-seasoned tear soup. One of her friends made it from scratch after her child died. As soon as Brandy tasted the rich flavor of that carefully made soup, she promised herself to never assume that quicker was better. So we see Brandy here debating canned soup. I don't know, it's hard for me to see the book so big. Canned soup versus, and then when she got some of her friends, tear soup. You see her friend there kind of making her own. All right. Because of her great loss, Brandy knew this time her recipe for tear soup would call for a big pot. With a big pot, she would have plenty of room for all of the memories, all of the misgivings, all of the feelings, and all of the tears that she needed to stew in the pot over time. This illustration is so brilliant, and I'm going to hold it up and let you see it, and then I'm going to go through. I'll see if I can get it on the screen. I hope you guys are seeing stuff. So there are the books that are assorted there on Brandy's shelf, and then these are the pots that she's putting her food into. So I'm going to read it. So, more than I can bear, major tragedy, profound loss, serious heartache, big disappointment. Oh, big disappointment. Oh my God. Oh, bad news. Not fair. On the bookshelf, murdered, fatal diagnosis, suicide, spouse dead, infertility, friend died, divorce, moved, near-death experience, house fire, retirement, chronic illness, prized possession stolen, stillbirth, miscarriage, flunked geometry, unfaithful spouse, child died, loss of status, pet died. These are some of the things that can plunge us into grief, and I thought it was so beautifully illustrated. She put on her apron, Grandy did, because she knew it would get messy, as grief does. It seems that grief is never clean. People feel misunderstood, feelings get hurt, and wrong assumptions are made all over the place. To make matters worse, grief always takes longer to cook than anyone wants it to. And then Grandy started to cry. So, this is her contemplating the feat before her regarding taking on the grief. And then she started to cry. And then she sobbed. At first, she sobbed. Sometimes she wept quietly. And sometimes, when she was in a safe place where no one could hear her, she even wailed. It's so beautiful, guys. Can we not all relate? Can we not relate to this moment right here, just being by ourselves when we think no one's around and we just wail? What she's drinking is tear soup in a hot mug. Grandy knew that she had to make much of this part of the soup alone. She learned from the past experiences that most people don't like being around tears. Her friends would worry if they knew just how many tears Grandy's recipe called for this time. So, the old and somewhat wise woman reflected on her own special recipe as she looked down into the large, overflowing pot of memories. It was a task she would repeat many times during the next few months. This is about alchemy. When we are in grief, we will be called to turn it into something. And I love the smoke that's curling up through the autumn leaves. Crisp, cold night. But Grandy is in grief, so she does not feel the breeze. But she is making alchemy out of her grief. It's beautiful. Grandy winced when she took a sip of the broth at first. All she could taste was the salt from her teardrops. It tasted bitter, but she knew that this was where she had to start. Hey, Jess. I'm so glad you're here. This is where she had to start. And for now, it was the only thing on her menu. So this is her, Randy, being shocked when she takes the first sip. She's like, this is disgusting. This is horrible. And that's what grief feels like when we first plunge into it. It is horrible. And it's not a place you want to be. And you avoid it. And we'll talk about that shortly. There were things that Grandy never wanted to forget. These included the good times and the bad times, the silly and the sad times. And with her arms full of memories, Grandy made many trips to the kitchen. One at a time, she slowly stirred all of her precious and not so precious memories into the pot. So here's Grandy not wanting to forget things. And here's her carrying all of those things downstairs, one at a time, with her trusty pup there behind, watching her. Because she's like, I don't want to miss anything out of this soup. So what is the next thing that Grandy did do? Eventually, she ran out of things to add, and her arms ached, and she felt stone cold and empty. There were no words that could describe the pain she was feeling. What's more, when she looked out at the window, she was surprised to see how the rest of the world was going on as usual, while her world had stopped. Can we not relate to that, guys? When we are in a place of grief, that we 100% realize, oh my God, everybody else, like people are still going to the grocery store and everybody's okay, and sons and daughters are getting sent off to war and people are coming back, and I've got groceries to unpack and kids to tend to and a wife or a husband and a list of a honeydew, and you are feeling dead inside and you're trying to figure out how to go on with the rest of your life because everybody else seems to. So you figure it's what you should do. But it's not that easy, is it? Her grandson Chester, who just wanted his Grandy to be happy again, hoped his chocolate drops would make it feel better. Miss Bloomklotz, Miss Chadwick, Mr. Long, all brave yet fearful neighbors, dropped by to see how Grandy was doing. They filled the air with words, but none of their words took the smell of the tear soup away. Brandy was gracious because she knew how helpless her friends felt. They wanted to fix her, but they couldn't. All Brandy really needed from that moment and from them was a knowing look and a warm hug. I love this part so much because this is where my friend that gave me this beautiful book comes into play. I did not understand when she spoke about the grief that I was going through being a lot because I'm expressive, right? Which is not something women are taught, and especially of multiple different generations, it's not taught. This is something we've embraced in the last, I would say, really, truly, honestly. Yes, I understand Gloria Steinem and the women's movement and rights, but I'm saying in the last like 10 years, like I can see that we are all just saying the things we really want to say. So my friend grew up in a different way. So to watch and was advised differently as well. And she shared that with me. And that's what Zig Ziglar says is seek first to understand and then to be understood. When she said something that initially didn't make me feel good, instead of just turning on it and being like, I hate you, I thought there's something else here. What does this mean? And how did she get here? And what can I do? So I asked her story, and she told me her story, and I was so grateful that she shared because we were able to connect there. I understood immediately how she felt when she was able to articulate it. She wanted to fix it for me because seeing me hurt her. So for some friends that don't know how to help you in grief, or they're awkward, or they laugh, or they do the wrong thing, she didn't laugh or do anything like that. But we all have different responses, right? When people are grieving, she was in so much pain because she was such an empath that it hurt her. And so I really related to this part, and maybe you can too. People come by and they want to fix it for you, but not everybody can stand the smell or the taste of tear soup. There were days when Grandy hungered for a thoughtful ear. Sometimes she would ask total strangers, care to join me for a bowl of tear soup? This is so funny because this is where you guys come in. I made my tear soup here, one drop at a time, in videos that are now an archive and an encyclopedia for anybody going through something similar. It wasn't all tear soup that I made. Some days were fun, some days we played, but there was. Jenny, if you're here, you can admit there was some tear soup made. And you guys were the strangers that were my ear, and I'm so grateful that you were here. But thank you, because you were the only ones who could tolerate my tear soup when even my friends who adored me found it a hard thing to do. I'm so grateful for you. But no thanks, most would reply. I don't have time for tear soup today. Even some of Grandy's friends hurried past her house and pretended not to notice the aroma of tear soup coming through the open door. Grandy found that most people can tolerate only a cup of someone else's tear soup. The giant bowl where Grandy could repeatedly share her sadness in great detail was left for a few willing friends. Message. This is so good. So there's the, I don't know which side I'm on. There's the giant bowl of tear soup. Here's the giant bowl of tear soup. The pot that's simmering away. I love this because isn't it so true? Not everybody can deal with that. And that's something you have to understand as just like a grown up. I couldn't be mad at my friend. She was allowed to have her opinion. She was allowed to feel her feels, and she was allowed to feel overwhelmed because what I was going through was real. And it wasn't for her to drink my whole bowl of tear soup. I transmuted my tear soup into energy and into art and into communication and lessons. But it wasn't for her to do that. Can you imagine if all the words that I've said in the last year, you count up how many hours of videos I have here, if I would have said that to that one person, who could do that? That's not fair. So you have to find a way, whether it's writing, journaling, painting, exercising, healthy ways. Because sometimes what do we do over? We can drink and shop and eat over it and have sex. There are a lot of ways we can deal with our grief. But the healthier metaphysical ways are indeed best. Let's carry on. I'm here, Midge cried. I got here as fast as I could, and I'll be here whenever you need me. What a tragedy. I'm so sorry you're having to make such a big pot of soup. What a relief. Granny knew she didn't have to be careful with what she said around Midge. Midge wouldn't try to talk her out of anything she was feeling, and Grandy could even laugh and not worry that Midge would assume Grandy was over her grief. I'll say that again. Grandy could even laugh and not worry that Midge would assume that she was over her grief. Sorry, I couldn't get here sooner, said Midge. No problem, replied Grandy. I had plenty of help, but most of these friends will be history pretty soon. They'll be over my tragedy long before I am. But I know you'll still be around. Oh my God. Come on. Can we talk about people that can hold you down? You do not get many. So there was a whole line of people that came in at first and said, we're sorry, we're sorry. But when Midge shows up, that's her ride or die, and now they can have a tear soup party. Okay, sometimes we need to have a pity party, a grief party, a tear soup party, but there will only be certain people that can do that. I also similarly had that experience in this incarnation where I had a friend who was able to, for whatever reason, different level of energy tolerance, maybe not as connected initially as I had been with the friend that gave me the book, meaning that friend had seen me through lots of things for many, many years. So maybe at that point she was saturated. You know, who knows what was going on. But here's what I did have is one person who stood with me all the way along my journey. She was able to withstand it for whatever reason, I don't know. And the truth was, I was actually in more communication with her than I was with anybody else, meaning I didn't really spew this to my immediate friends and family. My strangers on the internet, I love you guys. Yes, we talked all the time. But nobody in my life knew this was happening, right? So besides like my mom or something like that. So it was really interesting. There was this one person, well, no, that's not true. I had a handful of friends, but there was this one friend that really knew and stood with me and was like, if you need to make more tear soup, let's do this. She came up with creative ideas of releasing and all kinds of magical things. And somehow didn't get tired of me grieving, and I grieved. So she didn't get tired of me grieving, and when I got through the steps, she was like, here's what's next. If you are not feeling better by she said this to me, if you're not feeling better within this many months or whatever, we're going to check you in somewhere, because this is not normal, but whatever. But we never got to that point. But the point is, I knew that she even had a contingency plan for if I literally jumped off the ledge. She was like, I got you, girl. I've never been held that way by anybody, and not everybody can hold you that way, and not everybody's meant to hold you that way. And that doesn't mean that the people that can't hold you that way are bad people at all. They are honest, good humans, but they can only tolerate a cup of your tear soup. Such a powerful lesson I learned with my friend that gave me this book. I'm so grateful. And such a powerful lesson I learned when my version of Midge showed up. I had a Midge in my life this last couple of years that literally let me just be as wild as a Taliban emotionally as I needed to be, and didn't feed into my fears and gave me clarity and held me and just held me. And you only get one, you don't get a lot. Okay, let's carry on. I don't know what to say, but I'll be glad to listen. Midge said tenderly, come on, tell me about it while we make some bread to go along with your soup. These two friends, who had shared 1,000 of laughs and just as many tears, pounded at the bread dough together. I feel like I'm unraveling, Grandy cried. I'm mad. I'm confused. I can't make any decisions. Nobody can make me feel good. I'm a mess. I just didn't realize it would be this hard. Y'all, when you are in grief, and the stages. I think it's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who talks about the 5 stages of grief. That denial part is the hardest because and then anger. These things, they all kind of melt together for me. When it was hard. It was hard for me for 2 months. And so I can't imagine, and I lost energy, not, you know what I mean? So for people that lose loved ones, and this year I lost people as well, that's true as well, from COVID deaths. And so it was a lot. That grief is a very powerful thing, and you don't realize it's going to be that hard. I experienced real true grief. I experienced it so that I could teach about this, so I'm so grateful that it happened. But it was intense. It was like, y'all, it was real deal intense. So Midge says to her, why don't we go for a walk while we wait for the bread to rise? Midge says, I know exercise is supposed to help me, but I feel like I have concrete blocks strapped to my legs. We better not go too far or you'll have to carry me home, moaned Grandy. And I love what the shirt says that Grandy is wearing, or excuse me, that Midge is wearing. And this is how my Midge showed up too. Friends through thick and thin soup. Amen. Sometimes we will be into the thick of it regarding the soup in our life. And essentially, what Midge was an emotional midwife. Because when you're going through death and rebirth and grief, there's a transformation process. Something is dying and something is coming back into being. And that's what Midge brought into her life, was the ability to be seen. Bring me to life, wake me up inside. Sometimes you'll have a friend that comes into your life that wakes you up inside that way. And that was what my person that was able to hold me through the storm did for me. And maybe that's something you will relate to in your moments of grief. Miss Cries-a-Lot called and reminded Brandy that she had been making tear soup for years and would be more than glad to come right over and show her how to make it the correct way. Thanks, but no, said Brandy. This pot has my name on it. Brandy knew better than to let Miss Cries-a-Lot or anyone else tell her what she should do to get through this terrible loss. Wow. Now this is powerful. This is powerful. So Miss Cries-a-Lot calls her. Can you guys see that? And she's like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Here's the thing. People will want to advise you on how to grieve. I did have some people try to do that too, and I was like, no, not as well. We're not doing that. So I was just like, Miss Grandy, I was like, I'm good. Thank you so much, because our processes for grief are all different. Don't let anybody bully you into that. Take your time. And that was some of the pushback that I did give to my dear friend, my Ethel. I was like, might talk about this for 75 years, and if I do, am I crazy? Does that mean I don't love you? Are we friends or not? And it worked out just fine between us. But my example of this is the Taj Mahal. That man built something, a monument to this day, one of those 7 wonders in the world, because of his grief. It was a monument to a wife that he adored and that passed away. Did people tell him midway through, stop building this most beautiful gleaming palace of your grief, an edifice, a tomb essentially, of your grief, because it's been 16 years, it's been 20 years, like how much longer? No, that was what he wanted. That was his homage to his beloved. And some of us don't feel that, gushy about our grief, or depending on who has passed away or if our relationship was complicated or not. But what I'm saying to you is that if someone could take that long to build a Taj Mahal, then amen, they can give you a few minutes to grieve. So don't let anybody bully you. Anyway, next her recipe calls for some comfort food. For Grandy, this meant mashed potatoes or ice cream. Comfort food always makes you feel better, at least for a little while. It gets past that big lump in your throat when other foods can't. And she said, I think I need some chocolate too. After all, it was her soup. So now Granny is adding things to her soup, because this is what happens when we start to get out of the depression. We're like, you know what? Oh, there is a life here. So let's see Grandy. She's debating with her pup. Should I add some more things to my soup? Some ice cream? She's giving her puppy a scoop. How many of you would give your puppies a scoop? No, that's bad for them, right? You would give them doggy ice cream that was like vegan and totally approved, right? Granny kept attending worship even though she was mad at God. Sometimes she yelled at God and she asked, why did this happen? And sometimes she demanded to know where God was when she was feeling so alone. Still, Granny trusted God, but she didn't understand God. She sensed that people believed that if she really had faith, she would be spared deep sorrow, anger, and loneliness. Granny kept reminding herself to be grateful for all of the emotions that God had given her, but she was so sad. So there's Granny in church, and she's like, why, Jesus? You said you were going to take the wheel. I didn't know you were going to drive me off the road. That's literally what grief feels like. Jesus, take the wheel. And then Jesus is like, skirt, skirt. He's Roddy Rich. And we're in the box. It's crazy. On some afternoons, people would ask questions like, is it a soup yet? Or how long is it going to take? You have been at this for over a month now. It's time to get out of the kitchen. Grandy fumed at all of her callers' advice, and she put do not disturb on the door. Caution, you're entering the grief zone. Grandy looked forward to getting the mail each day. She dreaded the day when no more sympathy cards would come. So this is Grandy saying, back up, extras, haters. I'm allowed to be here as long as I want. I can pour over my grief as long as I need to. I'm going to look at it as much as I want to. I love that. Grandy's like, you know what? Y'all are not bullying me. When she was alone and needed to think, she found it helpful to keep her notes for soup making. I love this. So I'm going to read through you the notes that she has down the side here for soup making. Today, I'm upset that I have to be making this soup. Then on 11/21, I don't think anyone remembers that I'm even making soup from scratch. Then 11/29, what's the use of life? Seems to be so hard. Then on 3/28, I'm beginning to like the taste of the soup. I think I could live on it forever. Thank goodness Grandy and Pops had been married a long time. They already knew each other's pure soup would be different. Secretly, Grandy wished Pops would put more flavoring into his soup, but he doesn't want to, and he's perfectly content to dine alone and sip his own soup. Hold on, guys. Okay. Sorry, he's perfectly aware to dine alone and sip his own soup. So, this is Grandy looking at Pops, like, you know, you need some seasoning in there. There's not enough salt. And look at Pops. He's like, I love my soup. I keep adding more tears to my soup. Okay. He's like, back up, hater. Stay over there with your soup. Making Tira's soup is hard work sometimes. It's all she could think about. Even the things Granny used to love to do, she didn't have the energy for, nor did she care about it anymore. Some of Granny's friends over the years had not tended to their Tira soup. Their boiled over pot scorched. What a mess. It took them a long time to clean up their pots and to start over. The smell of burnt soup still lingers in some of their homes. I love this depiction over here. Look at what's going on behind her. What happens when we're in grief or depression, guys? We get into a state of not caring. That could be about ourselves, our hygiene, our house, our homes, our kids, our pets. This is what happens when we see people get into extreme hoarding, right? A grief thing happens that triggers their grief. Something, a loss, is usually triggered with hoarders. And then they start to hold on to every single thing because they want to remember every memory from that loss because they cannot get back what was lost, okay? Or whatever thing shook them up. Here's the scorched pot that she's talking about that's boiling over in her friends' houses. And I thought that this was really interesting because it felt to me like, how many of us have observed people that did not manage their grief or didn't transmute it, and then it just was this lingering, permeating thing in their life. They thought, man, yeah, I cleaned the pot, but the acrid, that's the word for that. The acrid smell of burnt smoke. And if you don't know what acrid smells like, have you ever been in an office where someone's burnt popcorn? That's the smell that's there. So energetically, they're saying you can still feel that. Brandy knew that there were times where she needed to take a break from her soup making. Even though it was hard to do, she forced herself to get away. Brandy heard that a neighbor was having to take her turn in the kitchen. Some people thought that the neighbor was eating too much Tear soup, so Brandy, being an old and somewhat wise woman, called and invited her to a special soup gathering where it was not bad manners to cry in your soup or have second helpings. So here's Grandy getting away. I love the yellow here. That yellow is depicting solar plexus chakra, though it may not have been their intent. I see it. So she's getting back to creativity. She has on yellow here as well. And she is trying to get back to herself. Her clothing has changed as we've gone through the book as well. So she's now in some brighter energy and brighter colors. And she's creating a soup party. So what we know that Grandy is moving into is a place where she's starting to understand her grief. And she gathers. Soon the cook sat at Grandy's table and discuss the process of making their tear soup. There are some parts that require help from friends and some parts you just have to do alone. They shared stories about soup making that they wouldn't dare tell anyone else for fear of being judged or being a bad cook. They all laughed knowingly when Granny remarked how on days when she was daydreaming while driving, she was glad that the car seemed to know where it wanted to go. These people had become Grandy's new best friends. When you're going through grief, you will find a tribe that can hold you and stick by your side. Just Theory and all of the other ladies, Emily, that always are here. You are my tribes, my dear. I appreciate you so much. You guys are the ones energetically that encouraged me, that stuck beside me, and that were so kind to me, more than friends and more even than family. I am so grateful for you. So Grandy started a support group. And let's see here. One day, as Grandy and Chester, that's her son, her grandson, were going for a drive, Chester said, Mom says you've been making tear soup. What does she mean? Well, tear soup is a way for you to sort through all of the different types of feelings and memories you have when you are losing someone or something special. Remember when your baby brother died right before he was born and your mom sat for days holding his blanket and weeping? She was making tear soup. You made tear soup yourself by acting out on your own disappointment when you shouted at Jason, wishing that his brother would die too. Remember when Billy's dog died and he didn't want to play with you? Not feeling like having fun is one of the ingredients of tear soup also. And remember when Aunt Meg got divorced and they had to move? There was a lot of tear soup simmering in that house. What a beautiful description. What a beautiful energy. What a beautiful color channeling. We have the sunset, but also it's the sun rising to me. But if we're going into the color scheme, we're talking about our solar plexus, our root chakra. That deep blushing red is root chakra energy. Getting back to understanding how we are all family. And even in the loss, there was a lesson that was meant to be. We're almost done. Some days when you're making tear soup, it's even hard to breathe. Some days you feel like running away. You just hope a better day comes along soon. And then comes one of the hardest parts of making tear soup. It's when you decide it may be okay to eat something instead of soup all the time. The next morning, as Granny was cleaning up, Chester asked her if she was done making her soup. Well, I don't think you actually ever finished, Granny said. The hard work of making this batch of soup is almost done, though. I'll put the rest in the freezer, and I will put it out. I will pull it out from time to time and have a little taste. Oh, what a beautiful confirmation. The person that what a beautiful confirmation. The person that held me throughout my whole journey just called right now. Yeah. Shout out to Aslan. I love you, girl. Yeah, that you sometimes you have lions in their own way that hold you. I love this part when she says it's a part of time where you decide it may be okay to eat something instead of soup all the time. We do get to that point where we realize that our grief needs some relief. Oh, she just texted me literally, your angels are tattling on you. They said to reach out. Well, how sweet. See, that's what happens when you are connected. That's my midge. That's the person that was like, I got you. I don't care what's happening here. I got you. So what have you learned by making tear soup today? Asked Randy. And oh, excuse me. He says, so what else have you learned by making tear soup, Randy? She says, I've learned that grief, like a pot of soup, changes the longer it simmers and the more things you put into it. I've learned that sometimes people say unkind things, but they really don't mean to hurt you. And most importantly, I've learned that there is something down deep within all of us ready to help us survive the things we think we cannot survive. Grandy, you know so much. What will I do after you die? Asked Chester. Don't worry. I will leave you my recipe for tear soup. In the back, Grandy's included cooking tips because what is a Grandy without good cooking tips? And I will read through them. Grief is a process you go through as you adjust to the loss of anything or anyone important in your life. This one stood out to me. I won't read them all, but if your loss occurred through violence, accept that, if your loss occurred through violence, expect that all normal grief reactions will be exaggerated. That's the one that I saw that I wanted to talk to about empaths dealing with grief regarding narcissistic abuse, losses of families, having to divorce, third-party situations. Even if there might be physical violence that came along with that, there is an emotional car wreck that happens when a disruption happens in a family dynamic. And it's something that I have talked about in one of these videos, but it is violent. It's one where I talk about soul retrieval. There's a video I have up here about soul retrieval, and I talk about the fact that the ripping away, when someone steals a part of your soul because they're dishonest or they're a thief or they're dangerous or they're a sociopath or a narcissist or whatever, it is a violent separation because it is a mass ripping off and it's a surprise. This is not something like terminal cancer you saw coming. This is something where you were maybe duped or you weren't using your intuition. So that's why I wanted to talk to you guys about that. Also, this ties back in full circle for those of you that have been here through the whole time. The person that gave me this book didn't understand why I was so deeply grieving. Well, I didn't tell her all the nuances of my relationship and all of the 20 years that I was with that person and all the things. Like, she knew some of it, a little tiny bit, just a touch, right? I did not gossip about our relationship the way the other person did. So she didn't know much. But so she didn't get it. Like, why the depth? And I'm like, no, you don't get it. The Midge person did get it. And that was really important to me. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying that so you guys understand. She didn't get it because she didn't know how violent the malicious kind of purposeful stuff that happened in the ending of the connection was, and how it was done and it was laughed about and whatever. So she didn't understand all that because I didn't explain all that, because when you're in your grief, right, you don't talk a lot, all that stuff. And so the energy of that I want to convey to you guys is that the more violent the separation, the more traumatic that is, the longer it takes. If anybody gets divorced, they say it takes you 10 years to recover emotionally fully. For every, it's like 2 years for, or 6 months for every year you were there. So for a 20-year relationship, 10 years. I feel like I've accelerated a lot of my healing and stuff. And that's what I was saying to the friend that gave me the book. But we had to have this meeting of the minds and understand she could only handle a cup of my tear soup. Does that mean she didn't love me? Of course she loves me. She gave me this book. She loves me. She supports me and will do anything for me. And I would do anything for her. But that moment was a lesson that I got to teach about, but it also resulted in this great gift. So I'm so grateful, Ethel. Thank you. But it put me into a place where I understood for you guys that you need to give yourselves a break. Some of us went through high trauma and high drama. You are allowed to sit there and shake for a while. You're allowed to talk about it ad nauseum. You're not. You got to find your midge, though. I will say that message. Not everybody can take all that, and not everybody's supposed to. I mean, can you imagine a million people coming and grieving to you? So I just want you to be like vetting your people and then listen, because I didn't want to lose my friendship with the beautiful woman who gave me this book. But I needed to back up so that I could get reacclimated to myself, and I didn't want our friendship to be shook. So I was like, okay, how do we fix this? And we did. We're good. We're fine. I think we're good. I know we're good. We're good. The book was the culmination of everything, which included hugs and I love yous. We are good. But the energy for you is take your time. Grief and tear soup is not easy to define, and everybody's takes different ingredients, and it takes a long time to simmer. You can put it in the freezer. You can never take it out. You can forget what grief soup was all about, but you will have to make your grief soup. Different people make it differently, like the ones that let it scorch and burn. Don't be those people. Take your time to learn what the grief is teaching you, because even grief, and especially grief, is a teacher. It was my greatest teacher. All right, it was so good to share this story time with you, my kiddos of my heart and metaphysically. Okay, I just had a little like flashback. It was so good. Now stretch your fingers and wiggle your toes and wiggle your bottom and wiggle your nose and jump, jump, jump. That's how I used to get them in and out of story time, because you know they couldn't sit that long. This was a long book for my more mature, less ADHD adults, and even the ones with ADHD. If you made it through or if you paused it, good for you, boo. I love you. Come back and join me next time, and we're going to continue to evolve together.